Good afternoon and welcome to the second lunchtime webinar for OurPocono Waters. The second webinar is titled Time is But the Stream, the Legacy of Recreation in the Poconos. The OurPocono Waters campaign is unifying the community by educating citizens, business leaders, and local leaders about the importance of exceptional value for EV streams, highlighting the many ways that clean streams and economic development coexist in a region known for its natural beauty and booming tourism. If you would like to get more information, please like us on our Facebook page by typing in OurPocono Waters. Get involved by emailing Emily at rinaldi@penfuture.org. Stay informed through the OurPocono Waters website, www.ourpoconowaters.org. Today we are joined by two great speakers from the Poconos region. Our first speaker is John Baylor. He is a biologist with Aquatic Resource Consulting, and he is also a part of the nonprofits Trout Unlimited, Broadhead Chapter, Broadhead Watershed Association, and the Pocono Heritage Land Trust. John is here today to talk to you about the legacy of fly fishing in the Poconos. John?
Thank you. The Pocono area has a very rich history in the fly fishing legacy. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, up until the flood of '55, virtually every notable angler and angling writer came to fish the Poconos. There were numerous destinations that were well known among the angling community. Henryville House and the Hotel Rapids in Antelope were two of the most important. There were numerous others. Farms along the Broadhead became rooming houses for anglers and hunters in the wintertime. The Albert House in Canadensis was famous as a brook trout fishing destination. It was called a mecca for the brook trout fishermen. This is in the 1800s when our only trout were our native brook trout. The Henryville House was probably the most important angling destination in the country at one time. Not only major angling writers, but four presidents, Gifford Pinchot, Buffalo Bill Cody, Annie Oakley came and did a Wild West show and also fished the Broadhead there. Prize fighters, Broadway stars, and all the important angling writers came to Henryville to fish the Broadhead. Another very important site among early anglers was the Hotel Rapids in Antelope. The names of the notables that fished there will only be recognizable if you're familiar with fly fishing history, but some of the most important contributions to early techniques and the lore of trout fishing came from these important anglers and writers who visited the Hotel Rapids in Antelope. There were numerous other sites that were popular among early anglers. In the upper left is the McMichael's Hotel. Upper center is the Park House, which was built above the Henryville House on the Paradise. In the upper right is the Spruce Cabin Inn, which was built on the Broadhead, mainly to house fishermen. Some of these hotels housed 150 to 200 people, and they were built mainly to host anglers that came to the Broadhead. In the lower left, the Log Cabin Inn, believe it or not, was a very popular destination for anglers. It's still there, but it's looking pretty dilapidated. Lower middle is Stites Mountain House, another popular destination. And in the lower right is a place that was across from the Henryville House that became a very popular watering hole and dining place for the anglers after a day of fishing. As I said, the farmhouses along the Broadhead all became rooming houses for anglers. The only one that remains is the one in the lower right, the Haas farmhouse, which is now the headquarters for Broadhead Fly Fishers Club. In the 1800s, the first angling books published in America mentioned the Broadhead. The first edition of The Complete Angler, published in this country, listed fly patterns for the Broadhead because the editor had been to Henryville. The most well-known actor, Joe Jefferson, came to fish the Broadhead and stayed at Henryville House and in the Jefferson Cottage, which still exists in Paradise Valley. Robert Brownwell Roosevelt published one of the early important books. He was the uncle of Teddy Roosevelt, and he talked about the Broadhead as being a great stream. And numerous others. Henry Van Dyke and William Cowper Prime were the first in a long line of Princeton men who came to fish the Poconos, and notably the Broadhead. Paradise Brook Trout Company on the Paradise in the Poconos was the first licensed brook trout, the first licensed trout hatchery in Pennsylvania. Some of the members of one of the clubs established the hatchery. Originally, the fishing was for our only native trout, the brook trout. The brook trout population was decimated by clear cutting in the late 1800s, but we introduced brown trout from England and Germany, and the trout fishing had a renaissance because the brown trout did well, weren't quite as sensitive as the brook trout, and created another very popular fishery which persists to this day. By the 1900s, the Broadhead at Henryville was known for big brown trout. They lived longer and got bigger than the brook trout. And as I said, the trout fishery rebounded. There were three very influential angling organizations that all had connections to the Poconos. Brooklyn Fly Fishers was started at Henryville. Later, the Anglers Club of New York, by a similar group, started at Henryville on the Broadhead. And the Philadelphia Anglers Club started as the Salmon Anglers, but later on they decided we all fish for trout in the Poconos, so we're going to call ourselves the Philadelphia Anglers instead of the Salmon Anglers. The excellent trout fishing and water quality of the Poconos has lured notable anglers to form fishing clubs. Some of the most prestigious fishing clubs in the country were established in the Poconos, many of them in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Pohokuline on the McMichaels, Swiftwater Preserve, Parkside Anglers, and Broadhead Hunting and Fishing, Broadhead Forest and Stream, and the Henryville Fly Fishers, which was a later one, but equally notable. There are numerous other clubs that were formed in the Poconos, mainly because of the great water quality that existed here and still does. Why the Poconos? Why was the Poconos one of the first cradles of American trout fishing and fly fishing? Obviously, because we have exceptional water quality, outstanding trout populations, and macroinvertebrate populations, which are important to feed the trout, and natural beauty, of course, not just the water quality, but the aesthetic quality of our streams. And the trout fishery today is probably as good as it has ever been. These are trout from the last few years in the Pocono area, and some of them are equal to those that created records back in the 1800s. So again, the Poconos have been a mecca for trout fishermen since the mid-1800s and still are today.
Next.
So as Don was saying, the Poconos have a rich heritage of fly fishermen, anglers, hikers, canoeists, the whole 9 yards. And it is essential for our way of life. In addition to our many state parks, there are 4 national park units within the Poconos, and several other green spaces on the municipal and township level as well. Now, historically, the Poconos have been a place for those to escape their daily life. They have come for a long time, as far as hold on a moment. So folks have come to the Poconos with the hopes of escaping their daily life. The first resort, the Kittatinny, was started by Antoine Duteau in 1829 down in the town of Delaware Water Gap. People started to flock to the area and recreate, and by the early 1900s, there were hundreds of resorts in the area. Not all of them were the larger resorts that catered to people, but also the small farmhouses, as Don was saying, where people would open their doors to recreation. On top of the several names that were mentioned earlier, there were additional folks that came and vacationed within the Poconos. Fred Astaire and his sister were known to visit, Theodore Roosevelt, Mary Pickford, who was one of the largest names in silent movies at the time, and later on, John F. Kennedy, Lucille Ball, Jackie Gleason, and many, many more people. The first silent movie in America was actually filmed right here in the Poconos. As time progressed, after World War II, the Poconos became known as the honeymoon capital, enticing young lovers to spend their days enjoying the scenery and their nights in heart-shaped tubs and champagne jacuzzis. During the same stretch of time, the area became known for their ski resorts as well. Big Boulder was opened its doors in 1946. That was prior to the copyright on the snowblowing machines that make the Poconos such a large ski resort area today. That was copyrighted until the 1950s. Now today, a lot of the really large buildings of the Victorian age that made the area so ripe for resorts have burned down or fallen into disrepair. But people still come today to get away from the hustle and bustle of their everyday life. They look to the Poconos as a retreat from an urban environment and visit to hike, camp, paddle, ski, and otherwise immerse themselves in the great outdoors. Now, we all find time to recreate within the Poconos. If we look outside, there's just so much to see and do that it would be silly to spend all of our time inside. But there are lots and lots of benefits to recreation that are economic, health, and environmental impacts. As far as economic impacts, tourism has a huge, huge impact on our economy here in Northeast Pennsylvania. On average, Pennsylvania, the travel and tourism industry supports about 1 out of every 15 Pennsylvania workers. In the Poconos, that number increases dramatically. Nearly 2/3 of the region's labor income comes from travel and tourism, and over 1/3 of our employment. The Pocono Mountain region has the highest proportion of labor income and employment supported by travel, and at rates well above those of the state's other tourism regions. Travelers spend an increasing portion of their budget on recreation year over year, with the sector growing by $2.6 billion or 52% between 2009 and 2017. So what does that mean for our region? That means that those that are coming to the Poconos to recreate are bringing their money with them, and they are supporting our local economy. Of that leisure spending of people taking day trips throughout the state, about 24% of that is used in the recreation sector. Now, they also bring in funding with transportation, gas stations, and automotive industry. They bring in food and beverage through, they have to eat. And they love to spend money as well on retail establishments. So it's not just the recreation sector that is directly benefiting from people coming to recreate. It is everyone else that lives within the region as well. Now, economic impacts are a big portion, but the human health is also a big portion as well. So you can experience physical, mental, and social health benefits of recreation. You can reduce your risk of obesity, boost your immune system, reduce symptoms of depression, increase your life expectancy, relief of stress. It improves your quality of life and can give you a stronger sense of community and bonding. And it also helps with youth support. So getting out and recreating, it has a big impact on your health and on society as a whole. Outdoor recreation has been found to reduce crime, reduce littering and other forms of trash increases. It's just a very important aspect. Now, speaking of reducing trash, the environmental impacts of recreation. So if we preserve these green spaces that people recreate on and at, you can improve your water quality, your air quality, you can reduce CO2, you can reduce the effects of heat islands, you can increase biodiversity, create a habitat stability for threatened or endangered animals, create noise barriers and buffer zones, reduce effects of flooding, and help support groundwater recharge. There are lots of things that can be benefited through that. For CO2, the climate mitigation from forested land, you can decrease temperatures through evapotranspiration, provide shade and create a buffer for the elements, and filter out pollutants with your forested land. The larger the tract of land that you have that is preserved, the more CO2 can be absorbed by that green space. And forested land also has an effect on water quality. It lowers water temperatures, giving you that cold, clean, fresh water that trout need to survive. It increases your dissolved oxygen, decreases stream bank erosion, decreases chances of flooding, filters out pollutants, and provides a stable habitat for sensitive species. In conclusion, recreation and the great outdoors are closely entwined with the Pocono way of life and connect us to our roots while paving the way for our future. The benefits of living in such a pristine area are well documented. Preserving the high standards of our recreational space is important for sustaining the health of our planet and its denizens. Property values have been found to increase in proximity to green spaces. It brings in businesses and contributes to the local economy. It improves our quality of living and human health. And it acts as a carbon sink and decreases environmental impacts. Green spaces foster a sense of community and stewardship while providing an educational opportunity for the next generation. As those who are interested in protecting and preserving the natural quality and health of the region, what shared vision do we have for recreation and recreational opportunities in the Poconos?
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to everyone for joining us today for our second Our Poconos webinar. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them up in the Q&A box and we will start answering them.